Off to a faster start to the season. Get this stat. Bengals are 1-11 in the last 6 seasons in weeks 1 and 2. So Zach Taylor, the head coach, is hoping that his offense sets the tone early.
Well, we want to control the game, get on teams earlier, put points on the board to where our defense can really tee off and build bigger leads for us. And so I think that's an area where we can always improve, is get on teams quicker. We've had games where that's good. There's been games where that's not good enough. But I think the offense needs to be able to set a tone going into every game, and the defense can play off of that.
On the defensive side, Trey Hendrickson still not here, but the Bengals have been talking with Hendrickson. I'm told they made some progress in certain areas, but this remains a matter of guaranteed money, particularly later in what should be a multi-year contract extension if they can eventually reach it. But Shamar Stewart is here. He had back-to-back pass deflections in the defense and looked good. I talked to Zach Taylor, who said that he has tremendous burst and twitch.
All right, we love it, Jeremy. Great details there from Bengals camp. We'll keep an eye on that Trey Hendrickson situation as we welcome you into the show. We've got Field Yates, Mina Kimes, Adam Schefter here today, and a lot to get to. Adam, I want to start with what we were just talking about with Jeremy Fowler. Trey Hendrickson still not at camp. He's waiting for that new deal. You heard Jeremy's talk there about the guaranteed money. What more can you tell us is going on there with Hendrickson?
Well, that's exactly what's going on right now, Laura. Essentially, there's not much of a disagreement on the length of this contract, on what the average annual salary should be, but the two sides are having a difficult time coming to a common place where they both can agree upon the guaranteed money in that particular contract. The Bengals have wanted to offer 1 year of guaranteed money. They've upped their offer since then. They're a little bit closer, but still not where Trey Hendrickson would want to be, especially considering that when we look at the other top pass rushers that have gotten deals done this offseason, from Max Crosby to Myles Garrett to TJ Watt, those deals included 3 years of guaranteed money. And right now, Trey Hendrickson is not going to take less than what he has set in his mind. So the two sides are trying to figure out if they can find a solution to get Hendrickson back into camp. But the guaranteed money is the roadblock and the stumbling block between the Bengals and Trey Hendrickson finding enough common ground to get a deal done.
And Adam, as you've told us, Trey Hendrickson has no problem sitting out, so something to monitor. Mina, you heard Zach Taylor. He wants to start the season fast, of course, right? How much pressure does this Bengals defense face early in the season if they don't have Hendrickson?
Yeah, I don't need to tell viewers for the 100th time how important Trey Hendrickson was to the pass rush last year, how he really was the Bengals' entire pass rush last season, how raw their first-round draft pick Shamar Stewart is. Even though he's on the field now, I don't think there's any expectation he's going to be anywhere close to what Hendrickson did early on in the season. But for me, what I'm starting to get nervous about is the start, as you talked about. So week 1, the Browns, a little bit less worried about that offense. But I'm looking at weeks 2 and 3, the Jaguars and the Vikings, and I'm thinking about Brian Thomas Jr. and Justin Jefferson, along with Travis Hunter, by the way. We'll see what they get out of him. But I do not feel confident in the Bengals secondary when it comes to defending those two players. Their best chance of limiting those two receivers is a pass rush. And their best chance of having a pass rush is Trey Hendrickson back on the field. So you do get nervous about that when you start looking at matchups, at the possibility of him holding out for any length of time.
Yeah, Mina, let's go back to what Adam was talking about as the sticking point in this deal. It's the idea that the Bengals are less comfortable guaranteeing money for 2 seasons. So let's talk to what the downside could be if you do that in your Cincinnati. Maybe Trey Hendrickson hits a wall, falls off a cliff as a player this year, and you're overpaying him in the 2026 season. Let's talk about the downside about not having Trey Hendrickson on your team this year. You've got no chance. You talk about some of those matchups they faced early in the season against the likes of the Vikings and the Jaguars, and even week 4 against perhaps the best offensive line in the NFL, or near the top with the Denver Broncos. Think about playing meaningful football games in January against the likes of Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. Last year, if there were any team meetings between the offense and the defense in Cincinnati, Trey Hendrickson might have been the only defensive player that any of the offensive players could look in the eyes and say, you are pulling your weight, because the rest of the defense was not. So I understand these things are complicated. Saying otherwise, I think, would be disingenuous. But if ever there was a time for the Bengals to back off precedent a little bit and ignore the age a little bit, it's right now. The guy's been the most productive pass rusher over the past 2 seasons of the NFL. We have some hope for Shamar Stewart, but this roster outside of Trey Hendrickson rushing the passer leaves much to be desired. He is the fulcrum for this defensive front seven.
You mentioned starting fast and some of their opponents. Field, the Bengals have 7 games versus teams that ranked top 10 in points per game last season. So they need their defense to be better. They need Trey Hendrickson there. All right, new on NFL Live, some news coming out of Denver. Adam, what more can you tell us?
Laura, the Denver Broncos finally have a new deal for their wide receiver, Courtland Sutton. It's a 4-year, $92 million extension for a player who was enormously popular in that locker room. A couple of years ago when he got hurt in training camp, they struggled to replace him. He's become Bo Nix's most trusted target, and Denver got a deal done with him today, reaching agreement on a contract that will keep him in Denver during the prime of his career. The Broncos have looked at a number of players that they like to keep, but none was any more important right now than Courtland Sutton, and they now have him tied down to a deal that will have interesting reverberations considering some of the other wide receivers that are still looking for new deals.
Okay, Adam, you teed it up perfectly, so let's go to the next thing. Speaking of one of those, let's go to Washington, where wideout Terry McLaurin still waiting on his long-term deal. He showed up to camp yesterday. You're seeing the video there, despite being put on the physically unable to perform list. So Commanders head coach Dan Quinn addressed the media yesterday about Terry McLaurin.
Terry McLaurin has reported, and we're very happy about that. He'll start the training camp on PUP for his ankle. So on the business side, AP and the guys are still working hard with Terry and his rep on the business side of things. Terry's always a serious competitor, but a pro's pro in a lot of respects, Dave, that he's just handles things in such a right way. I wanted to, really, I was checking in with the man, the other side of things are there, but to make sure in the midst of all that, just, the joy of here, teammates, togetherness, and he's built a lot, with the teammates here.
Well said by Dan Quinn. By the way, Jayden Daniels' connection with Terry McLaurin was real. Let me show you some of the numbers. He threw 12 touchdowns to him compared to just 1 interception, averaged 9.1 yards per attempt, and had a 91 total QBR. When he was throwing to other wide receivers, numbers not even close. He threw just 7 touchdowns to everyone else and 4 interceptions. So just how important Terry McLaurin is to the young Jayden Daniels. Adam, what can you tell us about the contract talks in Washington?
Well, Laura, let's not confuse Terry McLaurin reporting back to the team with him being any closer to a new contract. The two sides remain apart in their discussions for a new deal. Terry McLaurin came in because, frankly, it stops the meter from running on the $50,000 daily fines that he was incurring by staying away from the team facility and working out on his own. Now he gets to work out in the company of Commanders trainers, around his teammates, and there is no $50,000 a day fine. He's not going to call it a hold-in, but we can call it a hold-in because I do not expect that we would see Terry McLaurin on the football field until he has some sort of new deal, which the two sides do not appear to be close to getting at this point in time. Obviously, there's a disagreement over his value, and I think Terry McLaurin can look right away at DK Metcalf, a wide receiver this offseason who was traded to the Pittsburgh Steelers, who got $33 million a year on average. Terry McLaurin was in the same draft class as DK Metcalf. He has arguably put up better numbers than DK Metcalf. He can make a claim that he deserves more, but he is a couple of years older as well. And Washington obviously values Terry McLaurin, but not at the numbers that he's currently seeking. And so, again, they can use whatever numbers they want. The Commanders have numbers that they want. The two sides remain apart. Terry McLaurin's back, but a deal is not at hand right now.
All right, Phil, we just saw Courtland Sutton get paid.
Yeah.
And you've been really good about illustrating why this might be complicated for Terry McLaurin and where the differences may be. Is there a number that you have in mind that would make sense here?
It's right around DK Metcalf, and I would argue a shade below. If it were me, and obviously it's not me, but I believe that when you factor in the age, and I think that while Terry McLaurin, who was a second-team All-Pro last year, is a tremendous player, I think the apex of DK Metcalf is a slightly more dangerous player because of the vertical ability for Terry McLaurin, but we're constantly using comps. Amon-Ra St. Brown signed for $30 million per year, Laura, when he did an extension with the Detroit Lions. He was going into the final year of his rookie contract, and it was a couple of years ago. Obviously, the number will continue to go up. A.J. Brown's at $32 million. This position has exploded. At some point, though, you got to peg someone. So I am thinking, if I am the Washington Commanders, the area that I'm comfortable is right around, or perhaps just a slightly bit lower than DK Metcalf. If it were easy, then we would have had this thing done 2 months ago, and Shefty would have tweeted about it. Everything would be hunky-dory right now. But when Justin Jefferson's at $35 million, and I think he or Jamar Chase is the best receiver in the NFL, you have to have thresholds if you're a team, because when you have a quarterback, who I get it, he just finished his rookie season. He's going into year 2. You're already pricing out a Jayden Daniels extension. That's what happens when you have a prodigy at quarterback. I love Terry McLaurin. It's also important for a team to find an area that they are comfortable in. I think it's somewhere in that 30, 31 to maybe maximum $33 million per year.
We started with the numbers of how good Terry McLaurin is for Jayden Daniels, right? And that's undeniable. But how important is McLaurin to this offense with the addition of Deebo Samuel? Because that is going to be something new.
He is still incredibly important, and I would argue this is where his leverage comes from. You put up the numbers last year. I like to look at a stat called expected points added, which is basically how much a player contributed towards actually scoring. Terry McLaurin was second amongst all receivers league-wide. No other Commanders receiver was in the top 50. So you add Deebo Samuel, who I think is going to be a seamless fit for Cliff Kingsbury's offense in terms of screen, getting you yards after the catch, working underneath. But that's a completely different part of the field from where Terry McLaurin does his best work. Think about all the go balls we saw Jayden Daniels hit to him in key high-leverage moments last year. There's really no one else on this roster and this depth chart who I look at and see as being able to replicate that. So that, to me, is what Terry McLaurin and his agents are going to be saying in this conversation, even if, as Field says, the Commanders also do have good reason to not want to overpay him given his age and the state of their roster.
Yeah, to your point, McLaurin had a Washington remarkable rise of black quarterbacks in the NFL, breaking through decades of barriers. When black athletes were told they couldn't excel in the sport's most coveted position. Really cool. Through Quincy's mentorship, you just saw a bunch of these big-name guys. But Jalen Hurts, Justin Fields, C.J. Stroud, Jordan Love, they've shattered those limits. A lot of the credit due to you, so we're so happy to have you in studio here. Let's start with how it all began. How did this private quarterback venture start for you?
I was coaching out at UCLA. Looking at the market, I saw a lot of talented quarterbacks who just were lacking in some physical training. These are the little things, the nuances that I need to get going. And I got in my car, drove from UCLA, lived out of my car for a couple years in Atlanta, reached out to kids on Facebook, and the first client that I got was actually Josh Dobbs, who's now with the New England Patriots.
It is amazing. So what's the process like of identifying and recruiting clients? Because we are seeing more and more quarterback tutors, but how many of them can boast a roster of the who's who of NFL quarterbacks?
There's a very small list of top-end quarterback training companies, and I think that fortunate enough to be one of those right now. And now it's the quarterbacks are more recruiting us. They want to know who they want to work with more so than us reaching out to them. So it's become a really unique industry. The best of the best guys all have somebody who they work with individually.
I've had the great privilege of covering Jalen Hurts all the way from back when he was in college and seeing his transformation and now to being a Super Bowl winning quarterback. Just phenomenal. We talk a lot about his growth, right? What more can you add having worked so closely with him?
I think the thing that you want to look at with Jalen more than anything is his perseverance. He's someone who had to go through so much from his time at Alabama, right? Getting benched in the national championship game, coming back the next year, just sitting on the bench, being patient, then going to Oklahoma, taking that team where he took them, and then getting drafted in the second round when everybody was like, hey, he's a 4th, 5th rounder, and he's someone who was so dedicated to doing the little things right. When I talk about just being disciplined and playing the game the right way, Jalen Hurts is that. So no matter where you rank him, 1, 10, 15, 20, right, you know that he's one of the best quarterbacks in the league because he's taking his team to the Super Bowl and he's winning Super Bowl.
For now, and maybe in the case of Jalen Hurts, another 6 months, he'll be with his quarterback's coach of the Philadelphia Eagles, his offensive coordinator, his head coach. What's the process like for you? Are you collaborating with these players' respective NFL staffs, or is what you're doing independent of the stuff that they do when they are back in training camp with the Eagles or the Texans or the Jets?